Well, I think we can start. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're here for our exciting new webinar. Before, I often forget to introduce myself, so I will do that first. My name is Swati. I'm the head of talent performance and innovation here at Westminster City Council. And I'm thrilled to be joining colleagues for this session, which is starting from scratch lessons from building new authorities with Gatenby-Sanderson. I hope you're here for the right session, but if you aren't, then just to kind of give you a reminder. For today's session, we'll be sharing some exclusive insights from recent research conducted with chief executives of established combined and unitary authorities, highlighting what they've learned, what they do differently, and what advice they have for others on a similar journey. We are joined here by colleagues from Gatenby-Sanderson. So we've got Fraser Thuard, and also two colleagues who've been part of this experience in their working lives. So we're joined by Ruth Adams, who's the chief executive of Southeast Employers, and she was previously the deputy chief executive of South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. We also have Amanda. Amanda Mays was the East Midlands Combined Authority during this establishment as an HR and OT consultant, and she was also the Strategic Resources Advisor at the Holland East Yorkshire Combined Authority during their establishment. So I won't go into too much detail about the actual content, but we do have some time for questions at the end. Please feel free to add any of your questions on the chat, and we can take them on once we've had our panel complete their sharing their experience. I hope that's okay, and everyone can hear me. I can see people are still joining. But I think we can start off. So over to you, Fraser, and I'll be here to kind of take any questions in the background as well.
Fabulous. Thank you, Swati. So look, hello, everyone. Really pleased that you're here joining us today. As Swati said, I'm Fraser. I'm the head of the local government practice here at Gatenby-Sanderson. And we're really pleased to be sharing some of these reflections with you from our latest research. Before I start, I want to say a huge thank you to both Ruth and Amanda for joining us. As much as we think this research is really interesting, and hopefully once it's shared with you, will give you a sense of what's been happening. I always think hearing real life experiences from people that have lived and breathed this stuff is really important. So Ruth and Amanda, huge thank you from GS. The research that we've been doing builds upon some research we did earlier this year, which we called devolution by default. So that was a report looking at local government reorganisation and all of those complexities of establishing new authorities. This particular piece of research looks very much at the evolution of devolution itself. And specifically, we've been speaking to chief execs, both current and former, who have played central roles in shaping new combined authorities. I think what's really important to say is what we've captured in the report isn't a blueprint. It's a set of reflections, and people have been really honest with us about what they've learned, what worked, what didn't, and what they wish they'd known at the start. So I've got up to about 10 minutes to share some of those reflections with you. So I guess if I start with a really simple observation, which I think underpinned everything we heard, without preempting anything, I hasten to add that Ruth and Amanda might say, but there really isn't a national playbook for setting up combined authorities. Every region has had to interpret government expectation independently. Some regions have benefited from existing structures like LEPs and transport bodies, but for others, there hasn't been that same sort of infrastructure. So they really have had to start from scratch under intense political pressure with sometimes some really limited resource. What's really clear in the research is that the early stages are really, really demanding. Leaders described to us that the process was quite lonely. Some described it as hostile. And a lot of them described it as quite cumbersome. They found that statutory orders were slow, governance arrangements were complex, and the politics, both local politics and national politics, as you might anticipate, were ever present. Um, and in many cases, leaders really were learning on the job whilst also trying to build credibility, not only with partners, but also with the public, which was really, really hard. Um, I think one of the strongest themes that emerged through the discussions that we were having and in the report were around leadership style. So, combined authorities, and certainly those that have helped set them up, there's a strong feeling that they require a different approach. They require a more nuanced leadership approach. Um, Autocratic and directive leadership just doesn't work. Um, Success really does depend on collaborative and collegiate and consensus driven leadership. As we were saying through the conversations, they're really easy words to say, aren't they? They're much harder to demonstrate consistently. Um, but I think for lots of the chief execs, it really has underpinned many of the successes that they've had. I think linked to it, one of the really interesting comments from one of the chief execs was that they described their job as as corridor work, um, spending the vast majority of their time engaging with council leaders and chief execs and stakeholders to try and keep everyone on side and in play. And actually, when people weren't on side and dropped out of play, that's when it got really tough. So it's all about convening. It's not about commanding. And it's been about building trust across a system where no single actor really holds all of the power. We talk about this a lot in the report. We reference a shift from reactive delivery into strategic leadership. Um, so people talk actually about not just delivering projects, but actually shaping place and aligning place-based priorities and influencing across boundaries in a way that is different to local authority leadership. Um, it's about leaders knowing when to nudge, knowing when to challenge, but also knowing when to step back. Um, and lots of the chief execs felt that was actually a real step change, even though on the face of it you might not anticipate it is. Governance was another critical theme, which probably won't surprise anyone in the room to hear. That balance of power between the mayor and the constituent authorities, I think, was best described as delicate. Um, in most cases, the governance model is consensual, but careful relationship management throughout was really critical. Um, there were some really interesting comments in the report around how different authorities approached that relationship with the mayor and how much say the mayor had over different dealings within the combined authorities. And perhaps Ruth and Amanda, when they talk, might reflect on some of their different experiences in the different places. Um, but it really reinforced the mayor's profile and how important it was to be absolutely clear about what the mayor's responsibilities and what their role is, but also what it isn't, so that we don't end up with blurred lines. Um, Most respondents, really interestingly, felt that engagement with central government had improved over time. Um, Leaders told us that relationships with senior civil servants, particularly director generals, feel more productive now than they ever have done. And I guess with that in mind, they felt this was like a real opportunity now to capitalise on what combined authorities and devolution might be in the future. Um, there was a feeling from everyone we spoke to that there's a growing understanding of the whole place agenda and that value that combined authorities bring. Um, but it's still hard work. It's still really hard work for chief execs and for leadership teams. One of the chief execs was talking to us about some really great relationships that they've got. It was chief exec in the north, so the combined authority has existed for some time, but they still spend at least 2 days a month in London to maintain those relationships with government. And even then, progress depends on persistence and clarity and strategic alignment. Um, Internally, many of the people that we spoke to underestimated the scale of what they were building. Um, there was some real honest reflections that combined authorities aren't just small extensions of existing councils. They are their own substantial organisations, but maybe the bit that was underappreciated at the start is they've got some really long-term responsibilities and long-term accountabilities, um, and building internal capacity early, recruiting the right people, investing in culture from day one was critical. It wasn't just a nice to have. And there were some really interesting reflections, and I'm thinking now about those that have got this to come. There were some really interesting reflections on how you recruit. So relying on secondments and service level agreements with local authorities can absolutely work in the short term, but there was a really strong feeling that that can often lead to burnout and blurred boundaries and sometimes some quite limited autonomy. Um, Different places will do this differently, but there are some really interesting learnings, I think, in the report. Um, Leaders did stress the importance of establishing dedicated in-house teams, especially in things like HR and finance and program management. Um, Culture was a big focus. Creating a distinct identity was really important. I think different combined authorities created that identity at different points in their existence. But I think there was some consensus that the earlier that is done, the better for everyone, because it's that that creates the shared purpose, and it's that that then starts to really shape the culture. Um, and when they talked about identity, they talked about branding, they talked about values, they talked about behaviors that really reflect the uniqueness of the combined authority and not trying to replicate what might have been done in one of the authorities previously. So it's really interesting, and we're hoping in the without having a blueprint and a playbook, that hearing some real experiences can help shape what you as HR leaders do in the future. Um, so what do they wish they'd known at the start? So just coming to wrap my piece up. Um, First, it's bigger than it looks. Uh, the workload's immense. The politics are complex, and the expectations are really, really high. Um, and there's a strong feeling from the group that can't be underestimated. Um, the second point that we all thought was really interesting is that and again, it might not surprise you, but delivery builds credibility. Um, Combined authorities are and will be responsible for massive programs and huge budgets, but the point from lots of chief execs were even if the first projects aren't perfect, even if they're not huge, getting stuff done quickly will help to build credibility that will enable success quicker when you become more established. And the third thing, which I think underpins all of what we've been talking about at the moment, is that relationships are everything, whether it's with council leaders, civil servants, the mayor. That success that they felt has depended on trust, transparency, and ownership. Um, so look, my closeout is like I said, this report isn't a checklist. It really is a set of lived experiences. Um, it's a reflection of what it takes to lead in this space, and that's still evolving and it's different in different places. Um, but it is a reflection that combined authorities are different, and it's a reminder that leadership in combined authorities, whilst yes, it's about delivery, it's also about convening and influencing. Um, so I'll wrap up there. I will preempt a question before it's asked. So our report is in final draft stage. It's moving into design next week, and we hope that we can launch that at the start of November. And of course, we will share it with everybody that's signed up to this webinar. But that's my flavour. Like I said at the start, really pleased to be joined by Ruth and Amanda. So, Ruth, if I can come to you to share
Yeah.
some of your experiences, that would be super.
Thank you. So, I was, as Fraser said, I was the Deputy Chief Exec at South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority long before the Mayor was ever dreamt of. So, possibly slightly different to Amanda's experience. In the very early days of combined authorities, you set a combined authority up, and a Mayor was just nowhere in sight because that devolution model came in a bit later. And so, I think what that meant for the early adopters of devolution, you had a bit more of a smoother glide slope into setting your organisation. So by the time the Mayor joined, there was a functioning organisation with governance, with processes, with people that were there. The challenge for some of the new adopters now is that the Mayor is elected almost a month or two after vesting day of the combined authority. So the Mayor's joined an organisation that's not got staff, that's finding its way through its processes, that's finding its way through its governance and its systems and its identity. And I think that is quite different. And probably my experience then, hopefully Amanda will sort of share some of the challenges of that, which I didn't experience at the time, sort of 12 or so years ago when we formed the South Yorkshire Combined Authority that later became the Mayoral Combined Authority. I think my insights very briefly sort of really echo the people, not unexpectedly, that Fraser's been talking about. And the first thing is, you can actually set an organisation up, a combined authority up, reasonably easily because you're setting an organisation up. It needs governance, it needs systems, it needs people. But to set an organisation up that's got a shared purpose, it takes a lot of time to and honest conversations to build the trust amongst the politicians and the chief execs. And that relationship is really important. And so in the formative stages, I always would give advice that to chief execs when I work with chief execs, if you think that you can do this meeting once a month, you can't. You need to be, you will be there weekly. You will need more time working on the collective. So the actual time it takes to set an organisation up that's got that sort of shared purpose or that's grounded in a shared purpose or a common purpose needs a load of really honest conversations, needs conversations to be facilitated because they won't just happen naturally. That comes out with a plan. And I say that the initial plan might not be where you get to after a year, but it's a plan of a few things that you've got in common and are the glue that holds the organisation together. And that's really important because there will be inevitably in this, there will be about turns, there'll be chaotic. It's not a sort of linear A to Z in some sort of really perfectly phased way. There'll be loop backs, there'll be conflict, there'll be challenges, there'll be mind changes, there'll be all of those type of things. And so taking that time, building that time. And so the senior leadership, whether it's interim or whether it's people facilitating the setup of these new organisations, really need to have in mind, are we getting the right face time with the leaders of the constituent authorities or the upper tier authorities? Are we building this, if there's a two-tier model, that districts that have got people in their places that ultimately will vote for a mayor think that they have got some skin in the game, even though they might not be a member of the authority? And are we sort of working together from that common purpose? And then when you've got that, there's got to be some sort of commitment that the collective needs to sort of deliver the plan and how resources sort of stack up behind that. One of the things alongside the innovation that comes with a new authority that my experience was really, really important to get right was the solid foundations of governance and decision making, given the scale of public money. And that's more known now. So, again, like Fraser said, in the early days of setting up South Yorkshire Authority, we knew that we'd got awarded adult education budget and we knew we'd have capital money and we knew we'd the accountable body at the time for the LEP growth deal money. So we knew we had many millions. But the scale now, you're going into setting an organisation up knowing that you'll be spending an awful lot of public money, and understanding the rules of the game is really important because what you get into in a partnership relationship sometimes, at its worst, you get people that might say, they're getting more than me. See that other partner that's in the south of the borough or that's the east of the borough? they seem to be getting more schemes approved than we're getting approved. And you get into this sort of very transactional debate. And so understanding the rules of the games, understanding how you're going to make decisions, and having all of that set out just clears the decks to enable you to be creative, to enable you to think about the sort of strategic intent of the organisation. And you're not spending too much time kind of arguing about, process. And then one of the things that I think certainly early combined authorities weren't strong at, they're getting better at it, was they got thrown a lot very quickly and didn't really focus enough attention on the program management of that and how they tracked impact and how they tracked performance and how they tracked output. So, that cycle of getting things out the door very quickly didn't have a feedback loop to output and input. And I would always say to anyone setting up a new authority, think long and hard about the program office and think about performance and think about benefit realization and that, because that becomes your story when you are sort of talking to government. Of course, there's a lot of risks in setting a new authority up, and Fraser's mentioned that the research fed some of these back. My experience, and I, before working in a combined authority, LEP team was in a regional development agency, and you can see the same sort of cycle that happened with regional development agencies. Combined authorities are being used as a home for everything, and they are growing and growing and growing. And in the early days, you did a bespoke devolution deal, which was based on the shared purpose and intention that the leaders wanted. So in South Yorkshire's case, it was all about skills. They didn't want what Manchester had got, they didn't want health, they didn't want that. It was just about building skills. They absolutely didn't want to do spatial planning or any of that. Now it's a lot more formulaic. You will be having these powers and responsibilities, and the risk is that it will get bigger and bigger. Now the risk to then an organization that is starting off with, it's not got its culture, it's not got its processes, it's not got its paradigms, it's not tested its governances, you end up doing many things poorly instead of being able to focus on doing fewer things well. And you also doing it at a time when local government reorganisation can be a distraction and create muddle in this area. So again, some of the combined or the organisation as I work with now that talk to me about setting an authority up, there's a lot of pressure from officers that are perhaps going to, particularly in two-tier councils, that know that their councils will be perhaps changing and disappearing, who are saying, well, the combined authority needs to take this project on, or the combined authority needs to take this on. And there is a real danger that LGR could also be a distraction from what is the core purpose of the authority. Relationships with government, as Fraser mentioned, can be knotty if government suddenly see this bank of mayors as being the solution to some of the long-term issues that they have not been able to get to grips with. So take housing as an issue. All of a sudden, the accountability going for housing numbers further down the chain. What does that mean to an organisation when government, through all sorts of guises over the previous years, has not necessarily managed to get a grip of that? And so some of these debates are where it's really important that the network of combined authorities works well to sort of provide a counterweight for that. And again, it'd be remiss not to say anything about the mayor. The mayor comes in, and I was fortunate to work with a mayor that was quite a seasoned politician in the sort of bulk of the time that I was there when a mayor came in. But the mayor's positioned as a single point of accountability for lots of policy or lots of delivery agendas. But what that means, if it works well, there's a lot of collegiate working. If it works poorly, the system generally doesn't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on what feedback loops do the constituent members or the leaders want. What are the engagement loops that we need to build into this? And more especially, what's the scrutiny? Mayoral scrutiny is very weak. And I know there's a whole body of work on this, but, trying to work through some of those things. How do we want to locally hold our mayor to account if we need to, particularly if you get perhaps a maverick mayor that doesn't want to be held account? What's the feedback loops that you want to do? But equally, how do the sort of, I suppose, leaders of the constituent councils, what's the protocols for sort of really collegiately stepping behind that mayor if times are hard and there are issues to be accountable, that it's not that all the constituent councils that have been around the decision-making table, take 10 steps backwards and, the mayor, he or she is there as a fall guy or girl. And the last thing I'd say before I just say give a few reflections on behaviours, because again, Amanda's probably going to talk a lot more from the HRE side of this, is that one of the biggest challenges in this is mayoral combined authorities are new, they are in their ascendancy, they've got money, they've got a leverage with government, and that is a bit of an attractive proposition to many people. But it's coming at a time when local authority budgets are under pressure. They are cutting service teams and they are in sometimes in tricky situations. And yet it's the local authorities, even though the mayor is elected by probably the biggest pool of residents of any leader in the region, combined authorities are somehow a little bit divorced from resident services. And the teams that are struggling in local authorities are often at the front line of resident services. And the sensitivity to manage that relationship is really crucial because it's just part of being the partnership that some of the partners are in struggling positions, are pulled from pillar to post by trying to make the books manage to deliver resident services alongside this new organisation that's got money, that's got traction, that's got all these things, that's growing, that's putting salaries out there and whatever. And so the few reflections I'd have, and it comes back to perhaps the point that Fraser said about the people saying you need a different type of leader or a different type of person. You absolutely need to be comfortable with ambiguity and resilient in a combined authority because, and you need to come at it from a mind that when things don't go right, that's part of the learning journey of the organisation. And as a leader, you have to step back and perhaps not personalise that, but think, what's this telling me about our partnership? What's this telling me about where we are? What's this telling me about the tactics we need to use? What's this telling me about what's not working? So you have to be comfortable with that and you have to be very resilient in the face because it will loop the loop, you'll go backwards, you'll have to spend 6 months regaining ground you already had. It's very, very whatever. Whatever. You've got to have teams that are curious and open-minded, really curious to sort of push the boundaries because for combined authorities to really support the place-based agenda and to empower their councils to do what they need for their residents and places, you really have got to sort of come at it from that mindset about what could we do differently? What do we need to, what's been the blockers to what's not worked? I won't say too much about the next one. You've got to be naturally collaborators. If you don't like talking to people, if you don't like doing the corridor walking, as Fraser said, you're not going to sort of thrive in that environment. One of the final things I'd say is, as well as the tactics you need to deploy, is the leadership style bit about autocratic not working that Fraser mentioned. I do think is really quite a powerful bit that I wouldn't want to lose. The combined authority will be successful based on the success of all its places. And you have to avoid that binary sort of thing that this place will survive, but it comes at the cost of this other place in your region. And sometimes you get drawn into they're getting everything, we're not getting anything. And it's seen as a very binary, you win, I lose argument. The combined authority has got to brigade this into a narrative. It is about our collective and shared success. And that comes from a mindset of having that psyche of we've got to find the wins in this for everyone. There's got to be something in this that makes us stay stuck together in this organisation. So I'll stop there and hand over to Amanda.
Thank you, Ruth. It's really great to hear your reflections and hear Fraser's because I think we're all talking exactly from the same hymn sheet. So thank you. As Swati introduced, I have a HR and AD professional for over 30 years. Worked with the East Midlands Combined Authority for a considerable amount of time, a shorter stint with Hull and East Yorkshire. I'm currently consulting with the devolution programmes for Cumbria and for Sussex and Brighton. So I appear to be collecting combined authorities on the way. And hopefully I can just share with you this afternoon, I know we haven't got too long left, but share with you some of my experience. As Fraser said, it's very different. All of the organisations I'm working with started from nothing. East Midlands, we had 7 to 8 months to build the organisation. In Hull and East Yorkshire, we had a few weeks, literally getting the keys to the accommodation Friday before the mayor started or was elected and started on the Tuesday. So very different experience. But learning from those previous experience really helps us accelerate progress. And as an HROD community, I think we need to make sure that we do share our experiences and learn from each other. So in conscious of time, I've got 5 key areas, and you can't take OD out of the girl. So I'm going to summarise them in a word that spells my lessons learned. So I'm going to use the word mayor. So I'm going to start with M, thinking about the mayor themselves, about how complex their roles are and what do we need to factor into the design of the authority. A is about aligning ambition. Why I couldn't think of a particularly good word, but yattering. And if that means talking and collaboration. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. Thinking about the O, the organisation itself, and then the roles within the organisation. So just to move on to the mayor, their role is complex, as Ruth has said. Each mayor comes with different levels of skills and experience. So within your design, think very early on about their induction and their support structures. So when they land, they have their support structures and systems around them. And I mean things as basic as having chief of staff, diary management, caseworkers. So from a practical perspective, that's so important to get right, because the mayors will come and want to make an impact and a splash in the area. So make sure as an organisation you're there to support them. You don't want, so Claire Ward often used to say, the East Midlands mayor, when she arrived, we were unpacking boxes. When Luke Campbell arrived in Hull and East Yorkshire, we hadn't even ordered the boxes. So that shows the difference in terms of where you're at. But absolutely focus on helping your mayor to land within the organisation as early priorities. Moving on to aligning ambition, building the trust, as Ruth and Fraser both said, is so important, because you will get disruption, you will get tension, and the scale of change is often underestimated. So my recommendation and my learning here is build in informal sessions into your plans for both officers and members. You're bringing together constituent councils who may not have worked that closely together in the past, and certainly leaders will need to have that time to have behind the scenes conversations. So in public, it's played out in a beautifully, collaborative way. So absolutely think long term about your system, and think long term about how you get your leaders and your officers to build collaboration, to build trust, to build their relationships. And as Ruth said, we need to get to a place quickly from the start and coalesce around the fact that everyone will benefit, but just not in the same way, and at the same time they won't get their equal share of the pie. So it's about that collective endeavour for the place and the system in which you're working with. And I would recommend here external facilitation to help support that work, to drive that systems thinking and the place thinking. I'm now going to move on to my odd word, my yattering word about collaboration. Traditional command and control styles don't work in a combined authority context, and that success depends on building consensus, convening partners, and maintaining alignment across diverse political and organisational interests. So again, really focus on how you grow your talent, how you grow your systems in your place, and thinking about culture, because culture of your new combined authority really matters. We invested time very early in the East Midlands in establishing our distinct organisational culture, separate from the legacy local authorities. We thought about our values and our branding, and then your values and what you're trying to achieve as an authority flows through into your policies, from investment to finance to HR. And then really think about inducting people into the organisation in a way that makes them understand what your North Star is, what your values are for your organisation. So thinking about collaboration, and you, as Ruth said, think about your behaviours that you're looking for from people to enable that collaborative approach to really shine through in everything you do. Moving on to design of the organisation, my O of mayor. The CA is a sovereign organisation in its own right, and it has to stand on its own 2 feet. Quite often your constituent councils will have have considered this as their baby, that they've been growing it, and all of a sudden it gets into teenage phase, and this new organisation talks back at them. So really think about how you're designing your organisation, and bring in early your statutory roles, because it enables the organisation to stand on its own 2 feet and talk back. And you will always get asked in establishing a combined authority, how big is it going to be and where will it be based? And quite often your politicians particularly will want you to be a very small organisation and lean. And I would just say, yes, accept that, but it has to be right size to deliver what it needs to deliver. So we'll take location another time, because that is a whole headache in itself about where it will be based. But really think about co-creating your operating model, co-creating your organisation with the key players. So then as you grow, they're supportive of growing that organisation with you. And again, they grow at different sizes. East Midlands is already, in a couple of hundred, and they've only been in operating 18 months or so. So co-creating your operating model is really important. And there isn't a playbook, as Fraser and Ruth has already said. There is no one size fits all. So we have to interpret government expectations about what we need to deliver. And don't underestimate the growing your enabling services. So governance, as Ruth has said, and communications early. Your capacity funding won't extend to the resource you need, but have those conversations about making sure you've got the foundations of the organisation to enable fast progress later. And we've talked a bit about recruitment, but don't just bring in fresh talent to avoid replicating the cultures of existing local authorities, to be that dynamic, agile, strategic organisation in the system. And again, not just creating the likeness of your local authorities. You do get concern from neighbouring authorities and neighbouring combined authorities when you've got a new player about drain of talent. But think about your employer offer as a combined authority. You can create your own terms and conditions. You can create your own policies, align with your values, and think about how you attract talent to your organisation. And I'm going to say very quickly, I am conscious of time, that, factor into design equality and diversity, make sure it's baked in. The authority exists to make the regions more prosperous and more equal. And therefore, that needs to be reflected in the organisations itself. So take inclusion and diversity seriously, and really think about how you bake that into your organisation. Finally, on the R of Mayor, roles and people change and evolve, particularly in politics. And to use a phrase I've stolen from others, there's a continual need to make and remake the consensus of the why. What's the purpose? What are we here to do? So continue to make sure in your performance management processes, in your induction processes, that there is for officers and members, that there's a real understanding of the consensus of what you're there to do. So I'll go back to my mayor. It's about the mayor themselves, aligning ambition and action, yattering collaboration, and purposeful design of the organisation, and recognising that roles evolve. So I've really cantered through that because I'm conscious of time, but hope it's been helpful, and really happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was really, really insightful. I am conscious of time. I can see a question that's come through in the chat. Rosemary's asked, how do you enable the colleagues to build the skill set needed for the combined authority?
Shall I take that? Yeah. So in terms of building the skills, so we created both East Midlands and Hull and East Yorkshire with the purpose that they were going to be a learning organisation. So even though we were very small in East Mids, we brought in 4 graduates. We started the process of recruiting graduates before we were even employer ready, recognising we need to bring in new, fresh ideas and new talent. And as part of the design of the organisation, we focused on how we grew internal colleagues. But I think the question, Rosemary, is around how do you get people almost ready to apply for roles in the combined authority? So, I think it depends on the service you're in, but the behavioural skills that both Ruth and Fraser mentioned are almost as important as your technical ability. So if you're developing yourself ready for a combined authority, I would make sure you really understand what they're there to do, and then talk to colleagues who are in similar roles, because there's enough authorities now to go and talk to the new combined authorities, and just go and talk to them and get a feel for what you need to personally grow to be successful in any applications to join a new authority.
Yeah, my reflection very much in the early days was agility of staff, because when you start off and you've got 10 people or 12 people in the organisation, you sort of never really know what you're going to be doing. So whilst it's far more structured now, that agility, that flexibility, and all of those things really do matter in the sort of behaviours that you recruit for.
Definitely. And just to build on that some people just can't cope with the ambiguity and some people are used to having an organisation that they pull levers and there are things behind the lever when they pull it. You don't have that in a startup. You don't have that in a new authority. So that resilience is absolutely key.
Thank you both. I can see another question come up around workforce data. So Cheryl says workforce data, pay and terms and conditions is the best date required, but what other workforce information would you have valued at an early stage?
I think the workforce information obviously it's different when you're thinking about TUPE. So when you're thinking about making sure you've done your due diligence on TUPE transfers, but in terms of workforce information, it's more around designing what sort of workforce you want to be. So I don't think in terms of existing workforce data, we needed a lot of information. We knew what our constituent councils were, our terms and conditions were. We knew what the National Green Book and others said. But in terms of base data, I think when you're thinking about any TUPE implications, I would recommend you make sure your job descriptions are up to date, your contracts, everything you've got is up to date. But in terms of the combined authority itself, I think it was just really, as I said earlier, co-design, bringing people in to thinking about what type of employer do we want to be, and then creating your terms and conditions on the back of that aspiration of what type of employer you want to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions that you'd like to put to the panel? If not, we'll bring this to a close. Any more questions? No? Right. Thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much, Amanda, Ruth, and Fraser, for your, for sharing your experience and your knowledge around this subject. I'm sure everyone's found it really insightful. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend and Friday. Thank you.
Thanks, Swati. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.